There's a giant asteroid flying towards Earth. Detected by a Russian robotic telescope, it's one of the largest and most dangerous space rocks approaching our planet's orbit. RT's Murad Gaziev looks at the threat from the void.
Humanity's last experience with a large asteroid was painful. Almost 2 years ago, the Chelyabinsk meteor, traveling at 19 kilometers a second, exploded in the skies above Russia. The blast was dozens of times more powerful than an atomic bomb. But that meteor was only 20 or so meters in diameter, weighing about as much as the Eiffel Tower. This new asteroid is an entirely different story. It's 20 times bigger, the size of a village, weighing millions of times more. If this asteroid, for now called 2014 UR-116, flew into our atmosphere, it wouldn't just burn up in the air and shatter windows. This would hit the planet's surface, potentially killing millions. But calm for now. It's not yet on a collision course with Earth. The danger is, as it passes near planets and the sun, gravity could alter its path. In fact, the Russian space agency, which detected UR-116, has satellites watching just for such objects. And it's not only Russia. An American observatory a decade ago detected another similar asteroid. There was a big scare about that, if you remember. Apophis was named after the Egyptian god of evil, and asteroids its size hit Earth on average once in 80,000 years. NASA gave it a very real chance of impacting our planet, though that was later revised down. But the danger from asteroids is very real, and astronomers are increasingly keeping an eye out and thinking about what to do if they confirm a collision course, though don't expect anything quite as dramatic as Bruce Willis leading his team of misfits to save
of the world. Signs predicted by Bubba Venga. She is called the Nostradamus of the Balkans, and with good reason. Bubba Venga, the blind Bulgarian clairvoyant, who died 20 years ago, is believed to have predicted the rise of the fall of the Twin Towers, the 2004 tsunami, and the global warming, among a host of other events. Horror, horror, the American brethren will fall after being attacked by the steel birds. The wolves will be howling in a bush and innocent blood will gush, is, according to her followers, what she said about the fall of the Twin Towers. Here are 10 predictions that the blind Bubba made for 2016 and beyond. Europe will cease to exist, according to Bubba Venga. The continent will cease to exist by 2016, and all that would remain will be empty spaces and wasteland, nearly devoid of any form of life. She is reported to have said that chemical weapons would be used by extremists against Europe. China will become the new superpower. As per her predictions, China is set to become the new superpower in 2018, bringing an end to the United States and its economy. According to her, the exploiters, the developed nations, will become the exploited, the third world. In 2011, the International Monetary Fund had also predicted that China's economy will overtake that of the US in 2016, emerging as the new superpower. Hunger eradication. Bubba Venga has predicted that hunger will get eradicated sometime between 2025 and 2028. Onto Venus. Humans will travel to Venus, according to the Bubba, in search of new energy sources. They might even set up a colony there. Ice caps melting. According to the Bubba, ice caps will melt by 2045. The rate at which the ice caps are melting already due to global warming does seem to suggest the same. Cloning of organs. As per Bubba Venga's predictions, body organs will be cloned in 2046, and that would be the easiest method of the return of communism. By 2076, communism will return to Europe and the rest of the world. Underwater civilizations. By 2130, civilizations will learn how to live underwater, with the help of aliens. The death of the Earth. By 3797, everything on Earth will cease to exist. However,
are you serious? Are you serious? The water's turning blood red.
See here, except I want to show you what I mean about their technique of just blacking things out. Like I said, they used to me it looks like some of the older stuff they used to take like a black Sharpie marker just black out what they didn't want and then rescan it. And I'm going to show you how they do that. When I say they cover something up with black, this is what I mean. Oh, what do we got here, NASA? Whoa! There's numerous photos that they do this in. Numerous. I can't even count them. You know, look at some of this stuff. But this is what's going on. This is what NASA's doing. And then they release this stuff to the public. This is from the Cassini probe. This is Titan. I don't even believe that this is here, first of all, okay? There's definitely something behind it that's emitting all types of light. Now, if you can tell me how this is not, look, they just covered part of it. I don't even believe that this is, I believe that this is just cut in. It's too much of a perfect circle. They used like a circle tool and just cut this out and pasted it, as far as I'm concerned. But this nonsense, this is what I mean when I tell you that NASA's blacking something out. This is.
So while we all went about our lives yesterday, we came very close to a catastrophic event here on planet Earth, and we didn't know about it. It turns out we just missed getting hit by an asteroid, a piece of solid rock, roughly the size of a 10-story building. Now, I say just missed because it came within 45,000 miles of us. That's a lot closer than the moon is, and scientists say way too close for something that big. Had it struck, again, the people who tell us about these things, say the impact could have had the force of 1,000 Hiroshima-strength atomic bombs over a huge area of the Earth.
There are quite a few theories about how the world might end. For example, it's been suggested that there could be a big solar storm which would take the world out. Well, we get solar storms from time to time, and they're a bit troublesome if you're an astronaut. Indeed, not good news if you're an astronaut. But down here on Earth, we're protected by the Earth's magnetosphere, the effects of the magnetic field. And okay, solar storms can disturb that. They can produce currents in power lines that sometimes cause trouble. They can take out satellites, stop satellites working. So they could affect our GPS and any telephone calls that go by satellite, for example. But they're not going to end the world. Every so often, asteroids do hit the Earth. We know, we can see some of the craters. There's Meteor Crater, or Barringer Crater as it's properly called, in Arizona. And there's traces of a very big crater, partly on the Mexican Yucatan Peninsula and partly under the sea. That big crater was the result of an impact about 65 million years ago, and it's thought that's what caused the extinction of the dinosaurs and many other things. So a big thing like that could cause us some problems. Broadly speaking, what happens is when something big like that impacts, it not only makes a crater, it kicks up a whole lot of dust into the atmosphere. And the atmosphere cuts out the sunlight, and that stops crops growing and foods fail and there's starvation and so on. So that is something we need to look out for, and we are looking out for. There's an array of telescopes all around the world monitoring the sky night after night, actually monitoring about 1,000 potentially hazardous objects, things that might come and hit the Earth one day. As they monitor them, they discover that the vast majority of them won't, that as they get the orbit more accurately, they see it'll miss the Earth. But if there was something coming to hit the Earth, we'd get 2 or 3 years' notice. And even with today's technology, we could divert it so that it didn't impact the Earth. And there's research going on all the time which will improve that technology to hit us. Some of the techniques they use to deflect an asteroid, one of them is to paint it white all over, which means it reflects sunlight very well. And the sunlight bouncing off the asteroid will push it sideways. so that it'll move away and not hit the Earth. That's one of the neatest solutions. But they're also developing what they call gravity tractors, satellites that are pretty heavy and through their own gravity can attract the asteroid and make it change course. And there's also some that will actually physically hook onto the asteroid and tug it aside. So there's lots of ways of doing this. The magnetic field of the Earth, the thing that makes your compass point due north, that flips over every so often. And I'm using flip as a geologist would use flip. The flip actually takes 5,000 years.
Rice planting on a test basis has begun in a village near the crippled Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. This comes after the central government lifted its ban on entering Kawauchi village in April. Rice planting in the area had been banned at all paddies following the nuclear accident last March. The purpose of this year's harvest is to verify the product's safety. On Sunday, about 40 farmers and volunteers began planting rice at 30 rice paddies. Fabric that absorbs radioactivity was laid near entrances of irrigation channels. Villagers have also sowed into the soil substances that absorb radioactivity. Once the safety of this year's harvest is confirmed, rice production will be fully resumed for the next season.
I'm very happy to be planting rice along with so many others. I hope the safety of the rice will be confirmed so that the village can fully begin producing rice next year.
From Plato's Republic was the idea that population should be controlled and unwanted life should be disposed of like trash. In other words, that some were worthy of life and others weren't. This is a concept that comes through in Darwin's ideas about survival of the fittest. If we are evolving towards individual perfection by natural means, that would mean that collectively we are in fact evolving towards a utopian society of perfect men and women. However, in that case, those with perceived poor genetic material would be slowing that collective evolution, and so the whole process could be accelerated by getting rid of those who are not made of the right stuff. The end goal of a utopian society of purebred humans would justify the means of getting rid of the lesser ones. Remember that the full title of Origin of Species was On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection or the Preservation of Favoured Races in the Struggle for Life. One of the major influences on Darwin was a man called Thomas Malthus, who received the blessings of French deist Jean-Jacques Rousseau and famous Scottish philosopher David Hume. Incidentally, David Hume has a prominent statue on Edinburgh's Royal Mile, and if you look at the back of it, you will see this sun god symbol. Now, Thomas Malthus authored a document called The Essay on the Principle of Population, where he concluded that, amongst other things, society should adopt policies that prevent the human population from growing disproportionately larger than the food supply. Malthus, again finding a root in Plato's Republic, proposed genocide to make sure this didn't happen. Specifically, he thought to target the poor. He says, "Instead of recommending cleanliness to the poor, we should encourage contrary habits. In our towns we should make the streets narrower, crowd more people into the houses and court the return of the plague. In the country we should build our villages near stagnant pools, and particularly encourage settlement in all marshy and unwholesome situations. But above all, we should reprobate specific remedies for ravaging diseases, and those benevolent but much mistaken men who have thought they were doing a service to mankind by projecting schemes for the total extirpation of particular disorders." Malthus believed that by such methods, the undesirables in society could be effectively culled. He said regarding children, "We are bound in justice and honour formally to disclaim the right of the poor to support. To this end, I should propose a regulation be made declaring that no child born should ever be entitled to parish assistance. The illegitimate infant is comparatively speaking of little value to society, as others will perish, unless room be made for them by the deaths of grown persons." The logic behind the idea that those who serve society least should be destroyed was echoed under Darwinism in the survival of the fittest. The individual is lost in the collective. Again, the end of a utopian society justifies the means of killing the poor and the weak. This naturally leads to another idea put forward by Plato, that people who are perceived to have pure genetic materials should be encouraged to breed amongst themselves to produce a race of supermen fit for ruling over the masses. This selective breeding is called eugenics. Eugenics actually found its Enlightenment era origin in Charles Darwin's cousin, Sir Francis Galton. Galton regurgitated the thoughts of Plato in his work, Hereditary Genius, which was basically a racist tirade advocating a system of selective breeding for purposes of providing more suitable races or strains of blood a better chance of prevailing over the less suitable. In other words, trying to artificially speed the upward course that evolutionists thought we were naturally already on. In truth, selective breeding had been practiced for some time amongst the elite. Inbreeding was commonplace amongst the ruling class to protect the genetic purity of their future stock. Galton merely took this idea and popularized it as a legitimate science. This very same tradition was in fact practiced by Charles Darwin himself in hopes of maintaining a genetic superiority in his own bloodline. Darwin married the youngest granddaughter of his maternal father. Researcher Ian Taylor reveals the outcome of this project. Darwin's idea of inbreeding to produce superior stock can be seen to be a complete disaster in the case of his own 10 children. Of the 10, one girl, Mary, died shortly after birth. Another girl, Anne, died at the age of 10 years. His eldest daughter, Henrietta, had a serious and prolonged breakdown at 15 in 1859. 3 of his 6 sons suffered such frequent illness that Darwin regarded them as semi-invalids, while his last son, Charles Jr., was born mentally retarded and died in 1858, 19 months after his birth. Science has shown that inbreeding actually leads to speedier destruction of the genetic code rather than evolution because of something called biological mutations, which is why so-called purebred dogs are in fact more prone to health problems than mixes. The errors in their genetic code multiply as they are bred amongst themselves over long periods. But where true science fails, the religion of scientism continues stubbornly on. If they had followed God's wisdom in Leviticus 18, they would have heeded the warning not to commit incest, and they would have been all the better for it. In their own human wisdom, however, they persisted and reaped the consequences. The idea of eugenics continued to be promoted in the scientific community for a long time afterwards. At the turn of the 20th century, in 1901, the Statistics Department of London's University College became the headquarters for the Eugenics Education Society. Motivated by Galton's vision of a future utopia ruled by a genetically engineered pure elite, the Eugenics Society grew into a successful political movement and would eventually inspire Hitler's Holocaust against the Jews. Population control is still a big issue for the elite today. As recently as May 24, 2009, The Times reported of a secret meeting of billionaires held in New York City, including the likes of Bill Gates and Oprah Winfrey, where the #1 issue on the agenda was how to cap the global population at 8...
Bill Gates, interestingly enough. So watch this, listen to this, and we'll talk a bit and discuss population control.
This equation has 4 factors, a little bit of multiplication. So you've got a thing on the left, CO2, that you want to get to 0. And that's going to be based on the number of P2 being put out per unit of energy. So let's look at each one of these and see how we can get this down to 0. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to 0. Now that's back from high school algebra, but let's take a look. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to, now if we do a really great job on vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
Alright, now I want to run that back because I know it's my phone and skips. People are going to complain about my video, blah, 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 blah. This is up on YouTube, as I said, so you can go watch it yourself. There's longer versions, shorter versions. But let's listen to what he really said. 6 billion going up to 9 billion. And if we do a really good job, let's really listen when he says that.
The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that.
Wait a minute.
Look at it. This is what's washing up. And as it washes up, it's bringing all these jelly things. What is that? It's all over.
Look all around the world at the state of our society and climate. Superstorms like Harvey and Irma crashed into Texas and Florida, smashing rainfall and wind records, and a large 8.1 earthquake in Mexico caused devastating damage. For more than 10 years, our planet's climate has been changing at an alarming rate when compared to geologic records, with increased superstorms, earthquake, and volcanoes worldwide. At the same time, the media focuses our attention away from all of this towards celebrities, icons, and war to divert from the truth. So what really is the truth? As tides around the globe begin receding at a shocking rate, as seen in Florida, Brazil, and Egypt, and large earthquakes and volcanoes increase, we all deserve to know what's really happening, and if an outside force is actually to blame for all of this. We must not shy away from this information any longer, for a time of great change is upon us that has been written about for thousands of years. To understand what's happening, we must first go back to the earliest developed human civilization on Earth, known as the Sumerians, in what's today known as Iraq. The Sumerians represent the first civilization to develop advanced writing techniques, as well as tracking events and chronicling our ancient history. The Sumerians claimed that their knowledge of the stars, writing, agriculture, and social structures were all lowered from heaven by great gods who came from a planet with a long elliptical orbit known as Planet X, or Nibiru, meaning the crossing. The name Nibiru is derived from the unusual elliptical orbit that the planet follows, which takes it through our central solar system every 3,600 years. The Sumerians left behind records indicating the existence of this planet in cuneiform writings and cylinder seals. The most famous of these is known as VA-243, which shows a scale model of our solar system, which includes our central sun and the planets that revolve around it, including Planet X, where they claim their gods came from. Today, most of society has been tricked into believing these gods in Planet X are nothing more than a myth and fairy tale to hide the truth with laughter and ridicule. This clever tactic has hidden the real version of history and our origins for generations, until over time it has been nearly lost forever. It's time for humanity to awaken from its amnesia of all of this happened before us. The Sumerians called their gods the Anunnaki, which meant those who from heaven to earth came. The Sumerians wrote in detail about both who the Anunnaki were and the events that led to their arrival on Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago from Planet X. In these early cuneiform writings, such as the Atrahasis, we learn about two brothers known as Enki and Enlil, who bitterly fight over the direction of humanity, and provides details of the disasters caused by the crossing of Planet X. Much of the turmoil revolves around these two rival families and how this mysterious planet has shaped our story. Enki was a brilliant scientist and was known as the great magician and geneticist of the Anunnaki family. His symbol was represented as a dragon and serpent and was shown through the modern medical caduceus symbol. The name En means Lord, with Ki being the original name of our planet before it was called Earth, which was later renamed for this great being Ea, a previous name of Enki. Enki's half-brother Enlil, known as the Lord of the Air or Sky, and represented by the eagle and bull, was a polar opposite of his brother. His values revolved around a military and highly disciplined mentality, whose interests solely lie in the preservation and future of the Empire of Anu. All of the Anunnaki are named after this king of the gods who believes that he rules over Earth. The oldest and most important of these Sumerian writings is known as the Enuma Elish, which is a cuneiform tablet that speaks about our origin story and the devastation in our solar system long ago in the past. Found in 1849 in what is now the area of Mosul, Iraq, the Enuma Elish may be one of the most important pieces of writing in human history for the unaltered and extensive information given for the events of the ancient past. The Enuma Elish contains 7 tablets, with the first 5 describing the turbulent celestial events that happened long ago when these Anunnaki royal gods acted out roles as the planets of our solar system like a grand play, with Marduk being represented as the planet X, known to the Sumerians as Nibiru, with Enlil represented as Jupiter. Reading from an excerpt from Tablet 6 of the Enuma Elish, it states, "They bound him, holding him before Enki. They inflicted the penalty on him and severed his blood vessels. From his blood he, Enki, created mankind, on whom he imposed the service of the gods and set the gods free. After the wise Enki had created mankind and had imposed the service of the gods upon them, the task is beyond comprehension. The gods were then divided, all of the Anunnaki into upper and lower groups. He assigned 300 in the heavens to guard the decrees of Anu, and appointed them as guard." Enlil has always hated humanity and called them the beasts, referencing their primitive nature and compared to their DNA. These brothers were given ownership and responsibility over planet Earth and deemed themselves gods of everything beneath them. Most of our story and the extensive conflict throughout humanity all stems from the jealousy that arose between Enlil and his sons over the gifts within the human genome that were instilled secretly by using Enki's own DNA himself. We learn in the Enuma Elish in Atrahasis that the Anunnaki created humanity to ease the workload of the Ajiji, the workforce of the royal family, and to jumpstart the genetics of the Neanderthal with their own DNA to toil in the Absu, which we know is South Africa. Today, thousands if not millions of ancient mining sites, dating to over 100,000 years old, utilizing advanced smelting techniques, have been found all over the region. This is the ancient reason why we still value gold nearly above all else, and is part of our long history of slavery on the planet. We are now just waking up to the truth of all of this. The original purpose behind the creation of Homo sapiens, through the eyes of Enlil, was to become a simple slave race, with only enough intelligence to comprehend basic orders. Even the idea of giving humans more intelligence through splicing their own Anunnaki DNA greatly angered Enlil, and he fiercely opposed it. Unbeknownst to Enlil, his half-brother Enki ended up secretly designing a model of Homo sapien that was far too intelligent and possessed large amounts of Anunnaki DNA that could even rival their greatness as a species. Enki felt great responsibility and compassion for his creation, and endowed Homo sapiens with an advanced brain and higher consciousness, with chakra centers of energy that could be manipulated from a distance in the future in case humanity became enslaved by ideas. When Enlil found out that Enki had given Homo sapiens the gifts of their intelligence and the right to free will through conscious expansion, he was furious and promised to enslave humanity forever and never allow them to know the truth of who they really are. Much of the current reality stems from the promise that has always been kept and is the purpose behind the inversion of so many meanings that lead back to the truth, such as the demonization of the snake, Enki's symbol. This realization of reality can be uncomfortable to accept, but necessary for growth and perspective. When Enlil was chosen to be the ruler of Earth, instead of his half-brother Enki, a promise that had been made for the ultimate slavery of humanity was orchestrated and carried out 12,800 years ago as the planet crossing, Planet X, approached perihelion and disaster occurred across the Earth, as told by Atrahasis, who is also known as Noah. This represented the great reset button of humanity, and just the calamity needed by Enlil to permanently enslave humanity by tricking them through the conditioning of certain ideas and laws, so that society would unknowingly give all of their energy away to these gods. The popular figure of the cross, represented by Planet X, meaning the crossing or the sacrifice on the crossing through Marduk's later trickery, was implemented into religion to become a massive control system of information in controlling the minds of all of society. A profound quote to explain this deception and control by Enlil, Ninurta, and Marduk on humanity comes from Barbara Marciniak, which states, "The ultimate tyranny in a society is not controlled by martial law, but controlled by the psychological manipulation of consciousness, through which reality is defined so that those who exist within it do not even realize they are in prison." Underground cities such as Derinkuyu, Turkey, provide startling evidence to show the immense work involved by past cultures to seek shelter during times of violent earth effects from Nibiru. These underground dwellings have been found all over the world and speak to a forgotten chapter of human history, leading back to our current time today, where most of this isn't even believed or known by society to be real. In 1991, Dr. Robert Harrington, the chief astronomer of the U.S. Naval Observatory, took an 8-inch telescope to the end of Black Birch, New Zealand, one of the few optimal viewing points on Earth, and discovered a large planetary body approaching our solar system. Dr. Harrington calculated this planetary body to be approaching from below the ecliptic at an angle of around 40 degrees. A year later, in 1992, NASA gave 2 press briefings where they prepared the public for disclosure of a new planet in the far outer reaches of our solar system they called Planet X. Millions followed the events, awaiting the spectacular announcement of a new planet, only to hear silence. Before Harrington could publish his findings, he mysteriously died of throat cancer, and his research was quickly debunked as simply mathematical inaccuracies. All information and stories about Planet X quickly disappeared, and most forgot it even existed. Today, the Vatican Observatory continuously monitors the heavens from multiple telescopes, awaiting the great return from heaven of the Anunnaki in Planet X. As we approach the fall of 2017, 3,600 years since the last crossing of Nibiru, the return and fulfilling of the prophecy of Revelation 12 seems imminent as events are unfolding across the world. As Planet X reaches perihelion near Earth, the changes we have been seeing will only increase in intensity. Great care must be followed by those living along coastal regions, especially those areas that are very low-lying and prone to flooding. Ocean levels will begin fluctuating dramatically during tidal phases, as well as increased earthquake and volcanic activity. Any large seismic activity could lead to a number of tsunamis along the coast and should be monitored closely. No matter what happens during this pass, records indicate it will not be anywhere near as destructive as the past 12,800 years ago, which led to the end of the Ice Age and the Great Deluge. The biggest impacts from Planet X are likely not going to come from environmental disruptions, but from sweeping change across our social, monetary, political, religious, and scientific understandings. Reality as we know it will change forever once intelligent life is finally announced to the public. All of the silly distractions and ignorance that has plagued our world will melt away with astonishment and wonder once major discoveries in archaeology are revealed that lie under the Great Pyramid of Giza and the Sphinx, known as the Halls of Amenti. Our understanding of who we are and our place within the multiverse is just beginning to be understood. This will be a time of weighing our consciousness and measuring our actions to reflect on what kind of being we are and how we can contribute to our timeline story. The Anunnaki gods follow the ancient rules laid down for the balancing of energy during zodiacal cycles. The time of Pisces featured a negative polarity, which is why we saw war dominate the planet for thousands of years. All of these changes represent the great metamorphosis of our time as we enter the positive polarity of Aquarius in the next several years to take the first step on our journey into the cosmos to join our galactic neighbors. What kind of society will we become? One focused on war and material gain by the eagle? Or higher consciousness in the lost teachings of the great dragon Enki?
Issues in my mind, especially the book of Genesis, and you're correct. The 12th planet was Sitchin's first book, and he did spend a lot of time showing you evidence. Here's this tablet. Look at this one, and trying to make it. He was trying to justify this unbelievable theory that most of the scientific people and the academics were dissing him over, because he was like Wilhelm Reich. Or what was it? What was the guy's name who discovered Troy? I can't remember his name. He was a German, though. But, you know, the same problem with him is the academics dissed him. And, you know, so he was pretty much out on his own with his own resources. And so I kind of saw that with Sitchin as well. And, you know, Sitchin, he left himself open, I think, by writing The Lost Book of Enki and not giving any sources for it. I think it was a great book. And I think it wove together a lot of the pieces that he had from various sources to tell the big story, which he did very well. He was a great writer. But I never felt like I could reference that book without references, you know, so I never really talk about that one. But the 12th Planet really opened my eyes to the Sumerian documents. And I'd been looking for a culture that had the earliest writing, so I could kind of go back to the source and go, well, where did this technological chasm come between different civilizations? That's how I was approaching it. And then I read, I think, Genesis Revisited from him. And this really made me go back and read the Bible again closely. And I started seeing things from the perspective now, having read all the Sumerian documents, that made a lot more sense to me. And with that perspective, you could differentiate the truth from a lie a lot more readily. And so when you go back and read Genesis 1, and you see that that these gods, plural, created man in our image and our likeness, and then go read the Atrahasis account, where a council meeting of the Anunnaki specified exactly that, and I mean plural, there were 6 men and 6 women on this council. So, you know, you start seeing those kind of correlations as well once you've read the Sumerian documents, which predated the Bible by a very long time. All of a sudden you realize that what you have there that's called the Word of God isn't completely true. And there were political agendas in writing that book. If you truly understand the circumstances the Hebrew people were in as they were being held captive in Babylon, where they first saw these documents, these Sumerian documents. Okay, so what do we know? What is your specific question about the prehistory of Nibiru, this planet that they say they come from? And then we can kind of walk from there into the main players and who did what to whom and how we ended up where we are now. But kind of will give us a platform to maybe discuss a little more.
Great.
Correlations with how we go forward, because that's, you know, once you realize all this stuff, it takes a long time to process it. And some people years. Okay, this is like tearing out every belief system you have, and all of a sudden you're faced with this truth that's in stone, that's sitting up in museums, where you can either ignore it or synthesize it and realize what they were saying probably was not a lie, even though it was called a myth by the conquering cultures, right?
Well, and here's one thing that I'd like to make a point. As far as different religions and cultures and beliefs, that's one of the amazing things about being a human being, is we have the right to think for ourselves and believe what we want to. So, you know, whatever take or mindset you have on religion, divine providence, God, if you believe in multiple gods, if you're an atheist, whatever, you know, this is tonight just an opportunity to hear about stuff that's been documented throughout history, and the translations that are discussed have, you know, there's multiple sources that collaborate and say, yes, this is what happened. So whether or not you want to believe it or it's 100% accurate, you know, that's up for debate, and that's fine for you to believe. But a lot of this information is, it's cutting edge, because this is stuff that's been suppressed for thousands of years. When the Crusades took place, and, you know, anything that wasn't a part of the system church at that time, you know, was looked at as blasphemy, witchcraft, and people were burned at the stake. Libraries and tons of information was destroyed because of this. So a lot of this information and what you're talking about predates the books of the Bible. And that's just incredible. So I would like to talk about the 6 women and the 6 men that were part of it, and we'll get into some of the names and the correlations of the biblical references, maybe the Greek gods, and maybe even if they connect to the Vedic gods, you know, Valhalla and some of the Nordics and stuff. But my question was about Nibiru. Is the official version that I know about of the Anunnaki when they came to Earth was to look for gold. Is that correct?
Well, that is correct. If we start back on the prehistory of Nibiru, There was a king that ends up as the main progenitor in the Anunnaki line that we like to include in the story because he was head of the Anunnaki Council, and his name was Anu.
Okay, so Anu was the original king, or as far back as you can go, it was Anu.
Right, and we're circa 450,000 years ago right now, and according to their records, one of the beings who was the prior king, his name was Lama, excuse me, he was discussing problems in their atmosphere, whether to bolster their atmosphere to protect themselves against radiation using the volcanoes to reactivate them by firing missiles into them, or to create a particulate solution to seed the atmosphere. And this was a discussion they were having way back then, because you have to understand, in the myths of Mesopotamia, there's a document in there called the Atrahasis, written by Stephanie Dalley. And the document is, I'm sorry, the Enuma Elish. There's Atrahasis as well, but the Enuma Elish is the Babylonian or the Sumerian cosmogony, which essentially describes how our solar system came to be. And why it's important to them is because, according to the account, their planetary system, we call it the Nibiru constellation, all right? It looks like they have a mini sun and about 7 planets total. And each planet may have a couple of satellites.
Okay.
Well, anyway, this constellation somehow, according to their record, in this allegory of this epic battle in space with, think of the planets as billiard balls that are just flying around. Well, they somehow got trapped into our sun's orbit, in a retrograde orbit, according to them, that they weren't in before. And after the first time through, they described all the things they were doing at the inner planets to prepare themselves for shielding radiation, having to blow this up to get it out of the way, all these kind of things. And we didn't really understand it until we got a little more scientific, I think. They were talking about using weapons that could split an entire planet.
You know, and that reminds me of like a Type 2 civilization.
Right. So anyway, they had atmospheric problems without getting too lost there. They're in a 3600 retrograde orbit, according to them. They kept time in that method in what was called a shar. Even the Sumerian Kings list, their reigns were listed in shars. Okay, and if you read the Sumerian Kings list that was given to us by Berossus, it shows the first one having a reign of 8 shars, which turns out to be 28,800 years. As unbelievable as that is, and we'll get to that. Okay, but keep that in mind. So they got trapped in this retrograde orbit. It gives them a platform, a moving platform, to see all the other planets that are already in this space. Well, they didn't get out that easily. They apparently had some collisions about the second time around their 3,600-year orbit, such that one of the satellites of Nibiru struck a planet that was in the place where the Earth is now. They called it Tiamat. It broke part of it off. Part of it became the Earth, and the other part became the asteroid belt. And at that point, one of the moons of Nibiru apparently got stuck in its orbit, and that's why. And they called that one Kingu, which is our moon, which is unusually large for our planet, you have to admit. So anyway, so a lot of these stories they told in this Enuma Elish account, we're now verifying scientifically that what they said is true. And this document is quite old. So from there, they needed a solution, because if you imagine a planetary system coming into perihelion with the sun every 3,600 years, what it would do to your atmosphere. It'd probably strip it of various components that would normally be there, either through magnetic effects, through plasma discharge and radiating it, who knows, okay? But apparently they had this need to keep bolstering their atmosphere, which, and I think they knew in the long run it was a losing battle to continue to do this. They needed a long-term solution, and I think that's partly where the Earth came in their long-term plans. But anyway, they had an occlusion account in their Enuma Elish with the Earth, so they knew about it, and they called the planet Ki. Okay, and they counted from the outside in, from their perspective, since when they were out aphelion, they were the farthest planet out. So they counted inward, the planets inward, and that if you count that way, the Earth is number 7. That's why I named my second book The Seventh Planet. Okay. So with this problem that they had, the king Anu decided to dispatch his chief scientist, who was called Enki. It was his firstborn son. He was sent to the Earth to do a couple of things. One of the primary things was to find resources to bolster the atmosphere back on Nibiru as they were coming into perihelion with the sun again. So Some accounts show that he was looking in the Persian Gulf initially. That's where he splashed down and built the city of Eridu, which is right there where the Tigris and the Euphrates meet, running through the Sea of Reeds into the Persian Gulf. Okay, so that's, according to him, if he did that when he said he did it, that city's 450,000 years old. And it's still sitting there in the desert in Iraq, pretty much, I don't know, like a pile of rubble.
Jeez.
Anyway, so that's pretty amazing. So he came, tried to get colloidal gold out of the oceans. Apparently, if it's already in a colloidal solution, or you can use chemicals to do it and derive it that way, you already got a powder-like form that you can ionize in the atmosphere. It's very simple. Whereas, you know, if you take gold and have to smelt it somehow to get it to a powder form, or a form that could be sprayed, think about how you would do that. Would you just make it little tiny particles that you'd spray up there? It'd be too heavy. It would just fall out of the atmosphere, right? So that'd be very, very small particles. So that was about 450,000 years ago. So Enki Enki means Lord of the Earth, by the way. So his initial title was Lord of the Earth. His half-brother Enlil was still back on Nibiru, and he was born of his father Anu and his half-sister, Anu's half-sister, whose name was Arash. Her other name was Ki. She was nicknamed Ki, Arash. So she ended up giving birth to Enlil, and because she was a half-sister, and because of mitochondrial DNA contributions in the purity of their bloodline, he was in line to rule. Enki was not. So at this point, we're in the Persian Gulf, and Enki's trying to get gold. He brought a small band of workers with him, which he called the Ajiji. They also referred to him in the book of Enoch as the Watchers. These were highly technical fellow gods that generally ran spacecraft, low Earth drones, all kinds of technical things to watch the state of the simulator to report back to the higher ups, okay, whether it was an asteroid coming in or too much radiation, just whatever, okay. That's partly why they were called the Watchers. So they were there to assist Enki in getting this gold from the Persian Gulf. Apparently they didn't get it fast enough. 5,000 years elapsed. They ended up being vectored to South Africa, where the Atrahasis document picks up. So at this point, apparently they weren't getting gold fast enough from the Persian Gulf, and they got vectored down to Africa, where they could mine it more significantly. This is where the Atrahasis picked up. And in the beginning of this first tablet of the Atrahasis, it describes them casting lots, to divide up the territories between some of the key players that we should lay out here. We've already mentioned Anu and Enki. Enlil was the other one. The one we didn't mention was the half-sister to both of them, whose name was Nin Hartzog. And later on, we'll find out her name was Isis in Egypt. She was the medical officer that accompanied them. She was very important, because if one of them had a child with her, it would be in line to rule, because of this half-sister mitochondrial DNA thing. So she was kind of a key player for that reason as well. Okay. So they end up casting lots. Enki gets Africa. Anu goes back to Nibiru. Enlil gets Mesopotamia. And the exemption is that the temple of Eridu and the city that Enki built there with his original Ajiji Watchers still belong to him. And apparently he had a garden there, and he'd done all kinds of things in 5,000 years until his brother showed up. At this point, they've divided the territory. I left Inanna out. She got the Indus Valley. Okay, then Enki's in Africa. Oh, and the medical officer actually got some territory. Even though she was a medical officer, she got given the Bond Heaven Earth region up in the Sinai Peninsula that belonged to the Anunnaki. Now, this was the area where they had their, I guess you would call it, their communication facilities.
Okay.
And also transport facilities for moving the ore back to Nibiru, whether it went directly or via a way station.
I'm thinking of those in Peru or somewhere out there. They had those ginormous, like, landing pads and very big, kind of, I guess, sculptures of different animals and stuff like that. Was that done by the Anunnaki? Like, was that to give them an idea from space?
It very well could have. There have been several races, I believe, that have visited the Earth and done prospecting here. And I think there have been somewhat controversies between races of vying for those, resources from the Earth. So, resource wars and genetic wars both. Excuse me. Okay, so let's go back to Africa. We've now got the main players. They've divided the territories. And these Ajiji watchers are signed up to come down to Africa and mine the gold manually versus this colloidal method they were originally planning to do from the ocean.